Of course, with this section, we're talking about ecology. Remember, ecology is the study of interactions that occur between the organisms and their environment and how different things interact. We're looking at, there's two main factors. You have the biotic factors, and then, of course, in the next slide, you'll have the abiotic. But the biotic factors are the living factors. We're talking about everything that is life, bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, different animals. On our body, of course, we have bacteria. We have both good and bacteria. We have bad bacteria that create sickness. We also have bacteria in our intestines that help digestion. Anytime you eat yogurt, you're actually adding the probiotic bacteria. You're adding good bacteria to your system. We also have the abiotic factors, which are the non-living factors. We're talking about temperature, light, water, nutrients, soil. All these are abiotic factors. And of course, everything, whether it be biotic or abiotic, within a system actually come together. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about ecology and how all of these factors. We're going to be talking a little bit about the levels of ecology as far as we have an organism here. An organism is just one animal. In this picture, you have a whale. I'm an organism. You're an organism. A specific type, a single bacteria cell, that is an organism. Once talking about a group of organisms, and a group of organisms being the same type of organisms, we now call that a population. In this picture, we have a population of zebras. We could also assume that the grass in this picture is all the same type of grass, and that would be a population for the grass. All the different types of trees, I think this is savanna, and I forget the name of the trees, but they're all a specific type of tree here, so that's all a population. As different populations come together, of course, we have communities. Again, we're only talking about the biotic factors here, though. So we have a community here. That community is made up of a population of zebras, a population of giraffes. In the background on the left right here, I sort of believe that is a whatever these things are back here on the left. I believe that's a population of, say antelope or whatever they are. Of course, don't forget the plants. We also have the population of plants right here, assuming all of these guys are the same type of plant. But all these things, the giraffe, the zebra, the antelope, the trees here, that is all, it all comes together in a community. Once we start putting in the abiotic factors, now we start talking about an ecosystem. Here we have coral, we have the different type of fish, but we also need to look at the water. Of course, you can't see it in this picture, but we would talk about the temperature, we would talk about the salinity, different things like that. So now we're actually adding abiotic factors, temperature, salinity. We, of course, are going to be talking about the water. With the biotic and abiotic, now things, as they start living together, create an ecosystem. Once we start looking at different types of ecosystems within an area, we're talking about landscapes. And in this landscape, of course, you have an ecosystem of the mountains, and of course you got the snow here. You've got the ecosystem of, this is some type of coniferous forest up here, which is all evergreens. We have the ecosystem of this lake, or it could be the ocean, could be a bay, but the lake or whatever the case this may be. We could also talk about the beach area here, the shallow. Of course, we do have the shallow water. Out here, we would have the deep water. Those are different ecosystems and how everything comes together to make a landscape. And of course, all the different ecosystems, all the different landscapes come together for a biosphere. And of course, the biosphere is talking about globally. We talked about last week how things in India, how things in China actually affect us here. And so the biosphere, even though it's the same size as it's been for the past several million years, because of technology, because of weapons of mass destruction because of pollution, our biosphere is somewhat smaller today. What happens in one country does affect what happens in another country. We're looking at the biogeography of kangaroos here. When we start talking about the biogeography, we want to see the distribution of the different types of animals. This is just the biogeography of kangaroos here in Australia. Of course, I've never been to Australia. I have no idea what the different parts of Australia are or what they contain, but we would assume that down here in the New South Wales area, where kangaroos are the most dense, that's what this means right here, it's the most dense, you have the dark red, this would be more beneficial to their habitat than, say, this area over here in Western Australia, which is not going to have as many kangaroo, or this dark blue area here, it's not going to have many kangaroos here either. We also want to talk about the different organisms, and we're talking about transplant organisms. Of course, a normal species or a normal animal that is an animal that's actually from there. If we go back to the Australia picture, of course, we have the kangaroos, and the kangaroos are supposed to live in Australia. But we also have several different types of transplant species. One of these transplant species are zebra mussels. Sometimes they are brought in accidentally. They weren't supposed to be here. We'll be talking about sometimes ships bring things from different countries, and with their ballasting, which is when they take in water from one area and drop the water in a different area, then of course it can transplant. That's accidental. We also, they may come in on ships as far as within whatever the ship is carrying. It could be on bales of fabric. It could be on vehicles, and we have to be careful with the transplant species. Some of the transplant species that we have here, of course, was kudzu. Unfortunately, kudzu was not an accidental plant. Kudzu was brought in from Asia to help some of the erosion. It was also thought to be a very pretty plant. Now we're having problems with the kudzu because it can take over things very easily, like it does here in this picture, taking over this power line. When I was at Tuscaloosa County, our stadium lights would not come on because kudzu had got up in the transformer and had blown a fuse, and so the power companies had to come fix that before we could actually play. Another accidental transplant are fire ants. Fire ants are not from the United States. Fire ants came in from, I believe they came in from South America or maybe from Africa, but the fire ants came in, and the fire ants, of course, are taking. This map here actually shows the migration of fire ants from Mobile, which is the port they actually came out of. Notice that in order for fire ants to live here, as do all invasive species, that the environment has to be good for that species. Fire ants, of course, they can't live in the extreme cold weather, so that's the reason there are lines here. North Alabama, this section right here, of course, they're going to be here. Anything above this line, because of bad winters, there may be some years that they are there, there's some years that they're not. But again, they are an invasive species, and of course they do not have a natural predator since they're an invasive species. This is just showing some of the fire ant bites that you can get. I've never had fire ant bites that bad, but I'm assuming some people have in their life. Of course, we've also got African killer bees. They're another transplant or invasive species. Killer bees were brought in. They were thinking they would actually help the honeybee population, and they're actually very similar to honeybees. It's just these guys are a lot more aggressive than honeybees. A honeybee, if you get close to a hive, you may get stung once or twice, but after you get out of their zone, you're okay. With killer bees, once they attack, they release a pheromone that the others are attracted to, and they will actually chase down their prey or chase down that person if you get into their area. Okay, this next ecology, we're going to be talking about the actual weather and what determines the weather or climate in areas. Of course, the ocean, being 75% of the Earth, the ocean has a lot to do with the weather. In the northern hemisphere, the currents run clockwise, and as they run clockwise, of course, that brings warm weather up the east, or warm water up the east coast of the United States. Again, clockwise in the Pacific Ocean, except now it's bringing cold water down from the Arctic along the coast of California. That's the reason their climate is so much different than ours. It's because of the cold water versus the actual warm water. And of course, oceans in the southern hemisphere, again, they go counterclockwise. Okay, so counterclockwise this way. And here they're going to go counterclockwise on this side. And it's due to the rotation of the Earth. But again, on this side of South America, you would have warm water. On this side of South America, you have cool water as it comes up from Antarctica. So again, because of the water, because water has a very high latent heat, or a very high, it doesn't warm up very quick, it doesn't cool off very quick. Because of that, the air mass around it is either warm or cool depending on the water. This is showing that mountain ranges can also affect climate. Mountain ranges work in an excellent way of blocking rain and weather and currents as they come across the land. So on one side, you may get a very nice, wet condition. On the other side, you may get a very dry, barren, desert-like condition, and we see that here in the United States. This picture here is showing thermoclines, or how water mixes. Of course, especially here in the temperate zones, in the springtime and the autumn, the temperature of the water is pretty much the same throughout. But in the summertime, of course, the water surface gets extremely warm, so you have cooler water down at the bottom. In the wintertime, the surface water gets extremely cool, so it's actually warmer, deeper. Because of these thermoclines, or differences embodied in water temperature, of course, it creates places that fish and organisms stay. In the summertime, they tend to stay toward the top. In the wintertime, of course, they tend to stay toward the bottom. We also have microclimates. Microclimates are like the underside of a log, could be the shady side of a house. You may find moss on the shady side of a house. But microclimates, and even Wade Mountain over here at the Nature Reserve actually has a microclimate on top of it, which is just a very sort of sandy soil type. It's just a different climate. Of course, you're not going to have a tornado up on Wade Mountain or just on one side of the house due to microclimates. It's just a very small area. But it is areas where organisms have to deal with different types of climate conditions. And that is all for this section 1 of ecology.